Hey everybody, welcome back to the next episode. The next episode of Point Black. This is Adolphus Pruitt.
And I'm Reverend Darrell Griggs.
And we're going to start this with a statement. I'm going to read something. And I may just be plagiarizing, so I'm going to take credit for it, but it ain't my statement. They said in recent years, there's been a movement to elect reform-minded prosecutors across the country has won hard-fought victories, especially in a handful of large cities. Now, a growing backlash is taking on a new form. At least 9 bills introduced this year across 5 states will strip power from democratically elected prosecutors. In many other cases, more conservative legislatures are taking away power from local prosecutors in strongly liberal and democratic cities and putting them in the hands of Republicans holding statewide offices. And of course, we know that better than anybody here in the city of St. Louis. And I think we got a guest that Darrell, Reverend Griggs is going to introduce that not only knows it, but is feeling the pain in the state of Mississippi.
Listen, I'm telling you, in Georgia. Listen, it's happening. It happened in Mississippi. It happened in Georgia. It's on the peripheral here in Missouri. But our guest today, a very special guest, a very good friend of mine. We've been working in the trenches of civil rights for a lot of years. I met him when I was working with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta. Gerald A. Griggs is an Atlanta attorney dedicated to equal justice for all. I know this for a fact, he's been a tenacious trial attorney. He's been a zealous advocate, a compassionate social justice advocate, and on April 23rd, which is the day actually that I was licensed to preach, but it has no bearing here today, Attorney Griggs was elected as the 13th president of the state conference of the Georgia NAACP by an overwhelming majority. He's a graduate. He studied at Oxford College, the Oxford College of Emory University and Emory. Got his BA there. He received his JD from the University of Cincinnati College of Law. He's been practicing law for a while. I knew Attorney Griggs through both his law practice and his advocacy when he worked as an advocate for the NAACP in Atlanta. And he's been involved in the Ahmaud Arbery case, among so many other things throughout Georgia and throughout the Southwest. Attorney Griggs, we want to welcome you to Point Black.
Thank you for having me, Reverend Gray. It's an honor to be here with you and Mr. Pruitt. I look forward to having an engaging conversation about what's happening in justice right now across the South.
Well, listen, we appreciate it. And I don't know, Attorney Griggs, Mr. Pruitt happens to be the president of the NAACP branch here in St. Louis and is doing a wonderful job. And I'm sure if you're paps, I'm sure y'all have been in the same room together. But if not, and Lord, I can't believe I'm saying this on the radio, Gerald, he's all right. He's all right. He's good people. You know how we say in the South. You know how we say it in the South. He's good people. I like
Gerald Greek.
I don't know, Gerald. Are you Greek? You're an Alpha, aren't you, Gerald?
Yeah, Alpha. Yes.
Oh God. Well, anyway, at least we got Adolphus is a Kappa.
This is a good show. We got an Alpha, a Kappa, and an Omega up in here.
Well, you know,
you
gotta have an Alpha and an Omega. Hey, Gerald, you gotta have an Alpha and Omega. Now, Kappa, if they come along, they come along. But the Bible is clear. You gotta have an Alpha and Omega. Gerald, tell us we just read, man, Kemp is raising havoc down there, man, and the bill that just passed as it relates to prosecutors, as Adolphus said, it's real in this country, and it's extremely real in Georgia. Can you just give us a summary of what took place down there as related to the governor signing this law to basically take away power from prosecutors or to remove prosecutors?
Yes, so last session they passed through both houses and now been signed by the governor a new commission to oversee prosecutors in the state of Georgia and possibly sanction or remove them. And the reason why is, I'm sure you guys all know, across the country, there is a push in Georgia to hold a former president accountable for a call that he made into the state of Georgia asking to overturn the election. Well, there is a county prosecutor who's investigating not only the president, but all of the individuals who had something to do with that, and the fake electors who tried to send a different slate of electors up to Washington to overturn the election. And so this is the pushback. When you have strongly conservative houses of legislature who don't want real justice, they do things like this. And so for a party that claims to be law and order, it seems like lawlessness is reigning. Now, of course, the NAACP is nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean we're not political. And we will call out political corruption when we see it. And currently what's happening here in Georgia is the epitome of political corruption. You know, we already have a lack of trust in two of the branches of government. Now they're trying to infiltrate the third co-equal branch, which is the judiciary, which is charged with making sure the law is upheld and that we really do get law and order through trials and ultimately through the judicial process. We get to what is actually the law and if someone broke the law. So it's very dangerous what's happening across the South. Georgia, again, seems to be on the front lines of all these fights. But we see it happening all across the South. With, of course, what's happening in Mississippi, what's happening in Missouri. I'm sure other states will follow the lead here because the party that is losing power is now trying to wrest away the will of the people. Listen, if a prosecutor is elected, they should hold that office and they should be accountable to the people, not to the politicians. You know, I've always said justice needs to be nonpartisan, and I don't get along with many of the prosecutors who are probably going to be targeted. But they are doing their job in searching for justice, and sometimes if you break the law and you're a politician, you need to go to jail. And I think a lot of politicians, especially in the state of Georgia, who were subverting the election law here are worried about that, and that's why they passed the law.
Got it. Hey, Gerald, let me ask you a question. With your legal hat on, can you explain to our listeners how what they're doing, how it is really what the word I'm looking for is really twisting and changing the justice system as we have seen it for over, I guess, since the beginning of this country. But how the fact that they are now doing these dual prosecutors in states, and they're coming up with these commissions to take discretion away from prosecutors and all these other things. Just can you just describe in some words how that is really changing the justice system as we know it today?
Absolutely. And so my good brother Ben Crump says so apropos, there are two justice systems right now. And that is so disheartening and disappointing. But what's happening right now is that people don't like the outcomes that are coming out of the justice system. Namely, we were in the process of criminal justice reform. We were stopping racial profiling, the targeting of certain communities, and certain parties don't like that. So when you elect a progressive prosecutor, they stop prosecuting low-level nonviolent offenses and low-level drug offenses, which disproportionately target African Americans and people of color. Well, you know, if you're doing that, then you're lowering the prison population, and we all know that the criminal justice system is a for-profit system. And so when you start doing that, you start attacking people's bottom lines, and it starts to upset the power. And so the way they push back against the will of the people is voter suppression and then changing the rules of the game. In certain states, they're built off of the prison labor system. Right. And so we got to continue to fill these prisons. And if you have progressive prosecutors who are diverting cases, who are not prosecuting cases, because they have prosecutorial discretion. And let's be clear, prosecutors have had prosecutorial discretion since the beginning of this country. You know, we've always had to fight and push hard to make prosecutors prosecute cases, like we had to force people to try to prosecute the killers of Emmett Till, and we had to force people to prosecute Ahmaud Arbery's killers, and were successful in that case. We've always had to force the judicial system. And so now that we are getting gains in the judicial system, certain individuals are trying to roll back those gains. game by removing the prosecutor. But what they need to be careful of is how this new commission can be used positively by our group of citizens. Because, many prosecutors around the state of Georgia don't effectively prosecute hate crimes, don't effectively prosecute civil rights violations. So they also can be removed by this new commission, because what happens is a complaint is brought by the citizens to bring the prosecutor into this new qualifications commission and bring them up on charges and possibly get them removed. So there's always a flip of the coin where things can be used that were intended for bad can be used for good. So, but again, I'm completely against this. I think the prosecutor should have the discretion to choose what he or she is not going to prosecute, should have the ability to be a zealous advocate for the state of Georgia and the state where they are for the citizens when the law is violated. And I think that politicians need to be very careful if you start weaponizing the judicial system, because it can turn on you.
Hey, Gerald, we're going to have to take a quick break. We always say BJ's got to pay some bills, got to pay for that big old brand new car you just got. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side of Point Blank, we'll continue to talk to Attorney Gerald Griggs, the state president of the NAACP in Georgia. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Point Blank.
We're back here. We got Attorney Gerald Griggs with us on the line, and we're talking about this issue of how the legislatures across the state, across the country, in different states are taking discretionary power away from prosecutors, and in some cases removing them from office, period. And hey, Gerald, I cannot echo enough this issue of what you said, is that prosecutors have had discretionary authority and power since the beginning of this country. And so folks need to understand that they are now taking away from prosecutors something that was a part of the founding of this nation. And I think it's important that folks understand that.
Well, we looked at Mississippi. Gerald, we talked about it a couple of shows ago, and was speaking to another good friend, former State Representative Jim Evans down in Jackson. The Mississippi governor signed the bill expanding state control over Jackson's judicial system and policing. And what the bill basically did, it expanded. The state had control over the Capitol Police jurisdiction, the boundary around the State House. But they extended the boundary from around the state buildings to almost the entire city. And so, of course, people like Representative Evans and the NAACP and others in Jackson say that the measure would put mostly white, conservative state officials in control of much of a city where more than 80% of the residents are black and a majority is a Democratic city. So back to your point, and to this point, either here and even with our circuit attorney, the legislation that they wanted to create would have given the governor an opportunity to appoint a new circuit attorney. But in the same bill where they wanted state control, it means that you can then create a commission that would be over your police. So now you're controlling your prosecutor. You've got a commission that will control your police, and everybody that gets appointed by a predominantly white Republican legislature or a white Republican governor. So be it Georgia, be it Mississippi, be it Missouri, and some of these other places, you're still saying that white Republican males who don't even live in the jurisdictions that they're trying to take over are now doing that. So I hear you talking about that it might backfire, but if the governor is still able to control who's on that commission, Gerald, as they're trying to do in Mississippi, then be it the NAACP or any other or black elected officials, then how do we push back on this, Gerald?
Well, I think the most important thing we have to remember is we have to vote in overwhelming numbers so we take over those offices. And that's what I mean by it will backfire. because just like Georgia is browning and Mississippi is already brown, we have to make sure our electoral power and our electoral vote is heard. And so that's why they're trying to carve out little fiefdoms where they can maintain control, because, through racial gerrymandering and voter suppression, they are trying to lessen the power of the ballot. But what we learned in Georgia is that we can mobilize and we can turn out the vote, and we could turn Georgia black. Let's be clear. Georgia didn't turn blue. It turned black, and it will stay black. But what we need to do is to educate our constituents to the power of the vote. Because if we don't exercise that power, then these things will happen. If we don't empower our duly elected prosecutors to have the prosecutorial discretion that they need to determine what is and is not a prosecutable crime in this jurisdiction, because we are still trying to push forward criminal justice reform so we don't have mass incarceration of a group of people, and we have a pathway to success. We don't want a school to prison pipeline, but that's exactly what's about to happen. And so I think the best way to push back is by educating people, one, on how the process is supposed to work, and two, what they're trying to do to subvert the process. Because again, the party that always talks about law and order does not want law and order when it comes to them. Look at what just happened to the 45th president of the United States.
Right.
He has been criminally indicted for 34 charges. He's also been held civilly liable, and he's yelling to the rooftops that the system is fixed. Well, there's only one place in one community where the system is fixed, and they're trying to fix it even more.
Let me say this too. And Pruitt brought it up. Putting on your activist, a lawyer. Now, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, last summer, removed the state prosecutor, Monique Worrell.
Absolutely.
Now they're suing down there. She's suing, and I understand it's a major lawsuit. So in these cases, and Adolphus, the NAACP is known to be the legal champion for civil rights ever since there's been an NAACP. So legally, I agree with you, and I'm sure we all do, that we need to vote. We need to make sure that we do that. But legal challenges as well, and I know legal challenges can get expensive. But in the case of Georgia, has that been a discussion yet about pushing back on what Kemp has done from a legal point of view?
Absolutely. The NAACP state conference is already suing him on this voter suppression bill, which is SB 202. We're suing him on redistricting for the racial gerrymandering that's happening, and we're having conversations about pushing back on this particular issue. So you got it right. The NAACP has been the champion on this ever since the NAACP was born in 1909. Thurgood was very good at this. The LDF is excellent at this. We have lawyers on standby. But we also need the community to understand that there was never a time to be on the front lines. It's now. I mean, we can talk about what the giants of the past did, but we are in the middle of a new movement, and people need to join the NAACP and be on the front line so we can fight these legal battles, so we can fight for civil rights, so we can fight for voting rights, so we can fight against mass incarceration. So what I would say to your audience is this: if y'all listen to the sound of my voice, you're not a card-carrying member of the NAACP, you need to be one, because these laws are going to have an effect on your community and on your family. And it's time for us to fight like it's 1925, because they are trying to take it back to 1925 or 1950. And we have to be on the front lines pushing back, both in the courtrooms, in the streets, and in the suites of power.
Hey, Gerald, question. Now, unfortunately, the federal system does not provide any legal protection for cities who are under attack by these state legislators who want to stop certain policies that the city needs and need to have in order to promote public safety in their community. The federal system provides these cities no protection from the states. How is it impossible, you believe, or likely improbable that there can be a movement afoot to try to get federal legislation done that provides these cities the ability, some protections as relates to prosecutors maintaining that discretionary authority and not having it interfered by the state government? Is that far-fetched?
I don't think it would be possible currently with the current composition of Congress. I don't think it'll be able to get through the House, and I know it won't get to the floor on the Senate, but this is where the power of the executive branch has to be brought to bear.
Got
The
it.
Department of Justice was created for this very reason. And it's curious for people who propound this belief of local control and state control to be doing the exact opposite of local control and state control. And it's time for the Department of Justice through Merrick Garland to step in these jurisdictions where you see the rights of the people being trampled. So no, we don't need to wait on federal legislation. The DOJ has the power to go after these states in federal court right now under existing federal law. You know, the Civil Rights Act are still very much viable. Now, the Voting Rights Act through Section 5 has been gutted, and
Right.
Section 2 is under attack. But the rest of the Civil Rights Act are very much still in play, and lawsuits can be brought. So my question would be, have you spoken to your U.S. attorney in that district to bring federal action against these states? That's how they did it in the 60s. That's how we need to do it now. We need federal lawsuits all the way up to the Supreme Court. And, of course, the composition of the court is in play. But,
Sure.
you know,
Right.
the Warren Court was the most conservative court until we started suing and made it the Civil Rights Court. So, you know, people look at right now and say we're in a dark time. We've never been in a time like this. Yes, we have. We've been in a time like this in the 30s and 40s and the 50s. And you had legions of lawyers and legions of civil rights activists who stood up, who got in good trouble, who made sure they filed lawsuits and made sure that they made this country be what it says on paper for everybody by suing and by getting in the way and making sure they made good trouble.
You know, I think it's important that people understand, because I've had people stop me, Adolphus, and say, well, you know, Reverend Gray, you're an activist. You're a criminal justice reformist. Why are you giving so much time and energy and seemingly allegiance to prosecutors? You know, because you know, where I come from, on my street, Gerald, a prosecutor is the person that put Pookie in jail. But people need to understand that when we're talking about reformist prosecutors who have come to office to undertake policy changes, reducing or ending cash bail, declining to charge people in nonviolent drug possessions, holding police accountable for misconduct, addressing wrongful convictions. And on the other side, and you mentioned it, you've got a political party who in their political playbook for 2020 is crime, crime, crime.
Yes.
Crime, crime, crime. That in these major cities where Democrats are in control, crime is going up, and it's because of reformist prosecutors. You know, you got the elected officials, well, GOP elected officials, who are blaming black and or minority Democratic city elected officials, blaming them for the spikes of crime, and therefore saying, well, if they're not going to deal with crime, then we'll put our own people in to deal with crime.
Yeah, and I think it's imperative for the judicial branch to stand up and say once and for all, crime is determined in the judicial branch. So I don't care how many people are arrested, how many were convicted. And here's the thing, arrests were down. Crime is actually down in most major cities. I'm going to say that full-throated. Last year, there were 14,000 homicides in America. 14,000. There are 330 million people in this country. So my question is, if there's a spike in violent murder, how come we don't have millions of people dying? But on your local news channels and on all of your internet waves, they're talking about crime, crime, crime. That is a talking point. The criminal justice system was closed in most states for 18 months dealing with the pandemic.
Right.
So yes, there was a backlog. Yes, we are now cranking back up and having trials. But the only time somebody is a felon or a convict is when a jury or a judge convicts them, not when the police arrest them.
I heard
and so that narrative needs to go forward, because again, I don't see lawyers burning themselves out for trial after trial after trial, because if it was a crime wave, that would be happening. There's not a crime wave. What's going on right now is we had a wave in 2020 that was talking about radical reform, that was talking about racial intolerance and the brutality of police. And the best way to silence that is to get on your 1950s soapbox and talk about all these black and brown people invading cities and terrorizing people, so you build that fear up. We got to dispel with the fear and hit it with facts. Let's be clear. If a certain party was about law and order, a certain individual in Mar-a-Lago would have been locked up a long time ago. So miss me with the crime, and the law and order. Yes, everybody's entitled to due process. They're entitled to a trial by jury. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. I really feel weird protecting prosecutors right now. But if you are a prosecutor that's really about justice and about getting to the bottom of what actually happened, not what you saw on the news, which is one-sided police narrative, but what actually the witnesses saw, then you would be supporting these progressive prosecutors who want to get to justice. Justice demands that, yes, the guilty are punished, but the innocent are released and let go. We have way too many people languishing in jails who are merely accused. That's the purpose of cash bond. Not having to pay a cash bond. You shouldn't have to pay for your freedom when you're merely accused. You haven't been convicted of anything. And so that's the narrative and the talking points that we need for our leaders to start understanding and pushing back on the narrative that's fed to us every single night on the nightly news. That's why I cut it off. Because again, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I spend all day, every day in a courtroom. There is not a line in a courtroom of victims saying that they were shot at, or they were killed, or the families where they were killed. That's not happening around this country. But if you cut on Fox News, or you cut on OWN, or you cut on ONN and all this other stuff, that's all you hear. Yes, during the pandemic, people had more readiness and openness to getting weapons, and so there were more mass shootings. But as far as regular crime, thefts, rape, ag assaults, kidnappings, all down. If you go to the FBI statistics, it'll show you that. If you go to your local police department statistics, especially here in the city of Atlanta, it's all down. So what we need to do is support the prosecutors who say, listen, the old way of doing business is not good for all of the community. We need to reinvest in schools. We need to reinvest in education. We need to divert people who are nonviolent offenders into job programs and resources that help to alleviate the root causes of crime. Because I'm gonna let y'all in a little secret. You can't arrest your way out of this.
Sounds like something that our circuit attorney Kim Gardner has been saying over the last few years. You can't arrest your way out. These progressive prosecutors. Pruitt,
heck, the head of the FBI said that.
That's true.
Yes.
On this show, on this very show.
The head of the FBI, who is from Atlanta, said the most persistent threat to the homeland is homegrown white nationalist domestic terrorists. But we're not talking about locking them up. We're not talking about holding the Proud Boys accountable and holding the white supremacists accountable, but we're all talking about law and order.
But hey, Gerald, here, I'm going to give you two examples how blatant some of this stuff is. There's an editorial that was in the Times, and it was titled "The Empire Strikes Back Against Progressive Prosecutors," and they were talking about the prosecutor in Philly who they're trying to impeach, and they said this about this commission or the state lawmakers who are trying to impeach this guy. They said, this egregious misuse of oversight power is all the more shocking because Pennsylvania lawmakers never bothered to impeach prosecutors who had been accused of actual serious misconduct, including his predecessor, who was indicted on 23 corrupt counts while in office and ultimately sentenced to 5 years for bribery, and in the Somerset County DA, who was suspended by the state Supreme Court and is awaiting trial on rape charges. Now, they didn't impeach those guys,
I know.
but they won't impeach the progressive prosecutor.
Right.
And then, and here locally, the best example I can give you is a white assistant circuit attorney who was a star witness for the state against our prosecutor Kim Gardner, who they're trying to remove.
Yep.
Well, what it came out was that 2 years ago, she was at a restaurant. She left at the closing. She got home. Once she got home, she called the police and said that 3 black guys in a gray car ran up on her, pulled out guns, and sexually assaulted her, and then left. The police went back the next day, and they were able to find a camera, and the camera showed her leaving the restaurant, walking past the police substation, and get into her car and go home. And they said, hey, we haven't, the cameras do not bag up your story. And then she says, oh, I was blacked out drunk. Maybe it happened when I was in the Central West End. She started giving other locations of where maybe this was supposed to happen. But she is the star, and even worse, she was prosecuting black man working for the circuit attorney's office, and now she's the star witness against them. So what I'm getting at is all this stuff is they so blatantly uneven and unfair, and that's why I mentioned the federal stuff. There has to, and so I'm glad you mentioned the DOJ, because there has to be somebody, some arbitrator that looks at all of this and say, well, wait a minute. We think that these folks are making a point when they say that this is a misuse of legislative authority, and even more it is a direct attack on prosecutorial discretion, which they've had since the beginning of this country.
So, Pruitt, I'm gonna play the devil's. Yeah, I'm gonna blame the NAACP. I mean, I know what I hear what Gerald said they're doing in Georgia, but nationally, again, the NAACP's history right now, and I don't have a problem saying it. The NAACP seem to be all we have left. I mean, when it comes to national civil rights advocacy.
Well, we're gonna take a quick break.
Okay.
And then we're gonna respond to that. And because when he said the NAACP, next thing I'm going is to the Progressive Baptist Convention. so we'll be right back.
All right, we are back from the break, and before we went to the break, I used a phrase that I don't normally use as a preacher. I said I'm going to be the devil's advocate, and I asked the question, and I made a statement. The NAACP, from its inception, has been the grandfather of civil rights. I would contend that in this country right now, NAACP seems to be all we have left on the front line. But when you talk about DOJ, when you talk about Merrick Garland, when you talk about the President of the United States, black folk put him in. Right now, we need President Biden's DOJ. But NAACP nationally, I mean, what's the plan? Where do we go?
Well, Gerald, let me hop in real quick. There are fires all across the country. And if you're going to put them out, there's no one big hose that you can just spray down the whole country. You have to go to those hot spots. NAACP is throwing water on the hot spot down in Mississippi. They're suing.
True.
Gerald is in Georgia. He's throwing the hot spot. He's throwing the water on there here. And in Missouri, we're throwing the water on it here. Unfortunately, that we don't have. How do I put? Let me say this. Let me say it differently. Historically, the power of the NAACP came from its members and their willingness to do what was necessary, not just in the streets, but in the ballot box.
Correct.
And as a country and as a culture of people, we have become so bifurcated that we belong to so many different organizations that now we don't have, technically, black people don't have that one singular piece of cohesive pushback to deal with these things on the level that needs to happen. And that not only nationally, but even locally here. I mean, you know, you got locally here and everywhere else. We have people, Gerald, I'm astounded sometimes by people who says that, hey, I want the NAACP to do this and do that, and not truly understand not only what we stand for, but not understand the issue from a standpoint of what it takes to address it. So that's how I leave it.
And Gerald, you're getting ready to go ahead.
Yeah, what I would say is, you know, historically, you've had, you know, seminal leaders in the NAACP that were the symbol in the fight. And, you know, whether that's Thurgood or Walter White or Roy Wilkins or Donald Lee Holloway here in Georgia suing people. Of course, in Mississippi, you had Medgar Evers. And we still have legends like that are young legends and older legends now. But what people need to understand is they had an army behind them. Yeah. And so when I hear people say, well, what is the NAACP doing? The branch and the state Congress are no stronger than their membership. And if you're not a member, then you are not doing anything as well. Now, in Georgia, we have a slogan. You can count on the NAACP showing up when you even think to attack a civil right of a black person in Georgia, whether that's a jogger in Scintilla Shores or a young man that was attacked voraciously by bed bugs in Wright Street.
Gotcha.
But what I would say to the people that are listening, you can't expect the NAACP to do any more than what you would do. Now, we are on the front lines. We will stay on the front lines. We are in the fight. We are in the streets. We are in the suites. We are in the courthouses. But black folk, it's time for us to wake up and realize that we are in a fight.
Hey, Gerald.
We cannot lay down. We cannot give up. We have to have the strength of our ancestors to make sure that we win this fight for our descendants. So the charge I would leave everybody who's listening who says, what is the NAACP doing? Well, in Georgia, we could say we're doing a whole lot. Y'all see us every single day, whether that's the massive voter turnout that you saw in 2020, right, 2021, and 2022. But we also are holding politicians accountable. And I agree. Joe Biden's DOJ needs to do something about the rebirth and re-energized white supremacists that are going around this country. And we in the Georgia State Congress are going to hold him accountable to every single promise he made to Georgia. Because, again, South Carolina delivered his nomination. Georgia delivered his presidency. And we want all of the promises that were due. We need voting rights protected. We need the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We need to make sure that people are not attacking our civil rights and feeling like they will get away with it. And we need to be strong in our leadership. So we respect the President of the United States, but we will call him out. We called him out. We will continue to call him out. What are you doing to make sure that black people's civil rights are being protected? The NAACP has done that. We will make sure. That's our old motto. No governor, no mayor, no president of the United States should not fear the association to call him out on the protection of civil rights for black folks.
Listen, I mean, that's what you get when you play the devil's advocate. I mean, listen, Gerald, we do appreciate everything that is being done in Georgia. We want to make sure that our listeners understand, be it Georgia, Missouri, Mississippi, Philadelphia, Florida, Iowa, it is happening all over this country, this movement, this, you know, they call them 21st century prosecutors. And I agree, and I'm hoping that as people are listening, that they'll get involved with the NAACP, that they're registered to vote, and that we always hold people accountable. I've always said, if the Republican governments want to really address crime, the enforcement part is not the way to do it. Prevention is the way to do it. And until we start talking more about prevention rather than punishment, then we're not going to change too much. And I don't care how many conservative prosecutors you have or progressive prosecutors you have. Until we start dealing with prevention and not just rely on punishment, then we're not going to make any change at all. And before you go, I just want to make sure that people know who we're talking to. Gerald Griggs is an Atlanta attorney. He was elected the 13th president of the state conference of the Georgia NAACP. If you have any comments, listeners, if you have any comments, show ideas, you can always call us at 314-329-5050. You can follow us on Twitter at @PointBlack STL. You can go to iHeartRadio, and when you go to iHeartRadio, up in the right-hand section is the you push the mic button there, and you can leave your comments. As I always say, leave all your bad comments for Adolphus and BJ, and leave all your good comments for me. I always say that. You know, I'm the peaceful one in this group. Adolphus, you and Gerald have the last couple of minutes.
Hey, Gerald, here's what I was going to ask you. How? What do you think has happened to the cohesive coalitions that used to exist to fight these civil rights issues? There used to be time when it was blacks, Jews, the church. It was everybody. What do you think has happened to
and don't be gentle, Gerald. Don't be gentle.
To soften that, and not only what do you think has happened, what do you think it's going to take to get us back to that point?
Man, we're social media activists now, Gerald. Come on, you know that.
Well, I think that we're rebuilding that coalition. I mean, 2020 was a rainbow coalition that was outside. I think what's happened is our politicians forgot that just because people aren't marching don't mean they're not mad. We had the biggest civil rights demonstration in the history of this country for Breonna, for George, and for Ahmaud. But it can easily turn into Freedom Summer 2023 if they continue to allow people to attack our rights, people to kill people and not be held accountable, and to make excuses. And so what I would say is, like they have the attack on our black history in Florida, where the Florida State Conference is standing up, where we have the attack in Jackson, where the Mississippi State Conference is standing up, in Tennessee, where you had Tyree Nichols, and then you had the expulsion of the two black lawmakers. You had Gloria Sweetlove and the State Conference of Tennessee stand up. And in Georgia, whenever you see there's an injustice done, whether that's in Brunswick, Centilla Shores, or that's at Wright Street, you will see the Georgia State Conference stand up. So when I say that the strength of the NAACP is at its peak, I truly believe that. But what we need at this point is more membership and more people on the front lines. Yes, there's a whole lot of social justice, social media activists. We don't need any more of that. We need you outside. We need you at these town halls. We need you voting. And then we need you holding elected officials accountable at the state capitol, at City Hall, because this is going to come from the people. The power is in the people. So I think those coalitions can be rebuilt. But right now, black folks, we under attack. So we need to make sure that we stand up, and everybody else will stand up once they see us stand up.
Hey,
I'm proud of my black people. I'm proud of what y'all did. I haven't forgot what y'all did in Ferguson. Y'all were the ones that lit the fire. And so we will continue to stand with the people of St. Louis, the people of Missouri, and we will also show them the way here in Georgia, where we're the birthplace of civil rights, and we're hopeful to be a part of the rebirth of social justice.
Hey, Gerald, real quick, one thing I would love, I think the listeners would love to hear, as a defense attorney, you're defending these folks in the courts. So we always talk about the root causes of crime. Mm-hmm. So you have, of course, you defend them, so you talk to them, you know their background and this and that. Is there anything we need to understand about the people you defending and what their issues are? So when we start talking about the root causes of crime and dealing with it, that we understand it, that we get it from the folks who are defending them in the courtrooms, who probably know them best when they're at their most weakest moment.
Exactly. Well, first and foremost, there is no fear of being sent to prison. The inmates run the prisons. So you send them to prison, they only come back worse. But the root causes of crime is lack of education, lack of economic investment, lack of hope. And if you continue to criminalize marginalized communities, you will see crime, and you will see desperation, and you will see individuals who have no hope lash out and do violent things to people because they feel like their life is not valued. So what I would tell the people who believe that you can just lock your way up out of this, the prisons are bursting at the seams. And eventually, unless they are the most hardened criminal, they're coming home and they have to be reintegrated back into society.
Right.
What do you want to do? You want to reintegrate somebody who feels hopeless, or you want to give them hope? I'm in the giving them hope business. And so what I would just say is you can't incarcerate your way out of this. You can't be tough on crime when you're not actually tough on everybody. And so we need to figure out a way to reinvest. We need to divest from the criminal justice system and reinvest in education, reinvest in economic opportunity, reinvest in hope. You do that, crime will go down, and you'll have a productive and successful society.
Attorney Griggs, we really appreciate it. Want to just let people know we really appreciate you being on. Attorney Griggs was also the co-organizer of the Atlanta March of Social Justice and Women, which was Georgia's largest civil rights demonstration. And to coin a phrase from one of your alpha brothers, Dr. King said we build alliances based upon necessity and not necessarily desirability. We don't have to always agree on every issue, but there are a lot of issues that we can agree on. They're coming after our rights. Listen, thank you very much, Attorney Griggs, for being with us again. You can always send your comments to us, 314-329-5050. Follow us on Twitter at PointBlackSTL. And listen, it's really been a hoot. We want you to continue to listening to us, and we want to hear from you. Again, for Adolphus Pruitt, I'm Reverend Darrell Gray. Our guest was Attorney Anthony Griggs. We got BJ. We got Craig in the studio. We got all of the crew in the studio. Listen, thank you again for listening to Point Black. See you on the radio.